Hello, everyone, and welcome into the Irish NFL show with me, Colum Cronin. And I am delighted to be joined by today's guest. It's a man whose podcast I listen to religiously, and you
Oh, thank
will
you.
recognize him from your television screens on ESPN. It is Bill Barnwell. Bill, how are you doing, sir?
How's it going? We like I said before we got started, we have a lot to talk about today, so it's really exciting to have to have a time to talk about this stuff today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's great. Just welcome to your first occasion. It's funny, your last couple of podcasts, you've had first time guests joining you. So it's a
Hmm.
pleasure to welcome you for the first time to the Irish
There
NFL
we
show
go.
on, legal tampering day, whatever, where it seems to get earlier every year. I don't know in a few years' time where we'll be, but I, I'll open it up, right? I suppose what has caught your eye from the deals that have transpired? We're recording this just at 9 p.m.
Mhm.
Irish time, 5 p.m. Eastern. What has jumped out to you, Bill?
Oh gosh, a few things really I would say stand out to me as sort of the primary stories of free agency so far, or the, like you said, the legal tampering period, which I don't really understand how you can be legal and tamper at the same time, but the NFL contains multitudes, as you know. Um, I'll start with the running back situation because obviously it's been written about at great length, discussed at great length. I've discussed it, others have discussed it. The unique scenario facing running backs where they have not been able to get the multi-year deals they were hoping to get. There's been trouble for guys who have played very well finding significant markets, and that hasn't been the case so far. We've seen several multi-year contracts handed out. Um, Tony Pollard signed with Tennessee. Josh Jacobs signed with Green Bay. And then perhaps the most stunning move of the day to me, and we can certainly talk about this, Saquon Barkley, not just signing somewhere, but signing with the Philadelphia Eagles, who might be held up as sort of the vanguard for teams who have not valued running backs under Howie Roseman. The one exception was the year Howie Roseman was out of power. Chip Kelly signed two running backs, tried to sign three or four running backs that year. And then Howie Roseman took power back and immediately got rid of DeMarco Murray, let Ryan Matthews' deal run out shortly thereafter. They have gone out and signed Saquon Barkley from their division rivals to a significant deal. So I think we'll certainly hit on some of the other big stories, but the most surprising move of the day to me is Saquon Barkley going to the Philadelphia Eagles.
And on that, I mean, it's been been quite a turbulent few years for the Eagles, obviously, with the Super Bowl win, and then the Carson Wentz and Dougie, and then Sirianni. They go back. Jalen Hurts gets his contract. Then they lose the two coordinators. Then they've moved on from two coordinators. Vic Fangio has come in. Jason Kelsey has retired. And now, as you said, they're spending big money on running backs. Is this just Howie being Howie and surprising us all again? What do you think is the thinking? I suppose in terms of that you lose your kind of future Hall of Fame center, and then you
Mm-hmm.
go and you give big money. Now, granted, you've taken away from a rival, so I've seen the Giants fans'
Yes.
reaction. But what's the thinking? Do you think in Philadelphia, Bill?
That's a great question, and there's a few ways it could go. You brought up Jason Kelsey, and I think that's a really fascinating way of approaching this, thinking about it maybe not as a replacement for a running back, but a replacement for Jason Kelsey, in that you only have so many spots on your roster that are going to be devoted to improving the offense. There's not going to be a like for like replacement for Kelsey on the in free agency. They're going to move Cam Jurgens, I believe, to center. They re-sign Landon Dickerson, their excellent guard. We'll talk about guards in a minute as well. Re-sign their excellent guard Landon Dickinson before free agency began, so they're locked up there on the interior. But as they think about improving their running game and sort of adjusting to a life post Jason Kelsey, and maybe wanting to take some of the load off of Jalen Hurts as a runner now that he's making a lot more money, maybe it makes sense to put more of the offense around Saquon Barkley. The thing that what really stands out to me as sort of the big question is what it means for what the offense is going to look like in 2024. So one of the hallmarks of the Eagles offense with Jalen Hurts a quarterback, and even really look at other Russian quarterbacks. I know this is true for Lamar Jackson as well, a little bit for Josh Allen, not quite as much with Josh Allen in terms of how they use their running back in the passing game, but the Eagles have really not gotten the most out of their running backs in recent years in the passing game, which was interesting because for so long, especially during the Andy Reid era, that was really what made their running backs different. Was they got Brian Westbrook involved in the passing game, they got LaShawn McCoy involved in the passing game, but even Miles Sanders early in his career was a featured part of the passing game for Philadelphia. But as Jalen Hurts entered the lineup and as they changed sort of the way they ran their offense, the running backs really were not focal points as receivers. Miles Sanders' work went down. They traded for DeAndre Swift last year, who had been a very successful receiver in Detroit. DeAndre Swift didn't have spectacular receiving numbers or workload in Philadelphia. And so that's the thing that I wonder about now, because the Eagles, of course, as you mentioned, they fired both their coordinators. They bring in Kellen Moore, who had been with the Cowboys, where Tony Pollard had been a focal point of the passing game. You bring in Kellen Moore from the Chargers, where Austin Eckler last year, of course, when he was healthy, was still a viable part of the passing game. Is the offense going to change? Does Saquon Barkley's arrival tell us that the Eagles are going to be a different kind of offense than they were in years past? It makes sense given how things fell apart last year, and makes sense given that they have changed coordinators. But I just wonder at the end of the day, what is this offense going to look like? And for whatever the offense looks like, are the Eagles comfortable giving Saquon that sort of 3-down, heavy workload that we typically see backs of his caliber who were signed in free agency get? Because that has also been a thing the Eagles have not done in terms of, focusing their rushing attack around one player. They've always been a team under Roseman, or at least very often under Roseman, been a team that prefers to spread the ball out, give it to multiple backs, keep guys fresh. So really a possible sea change for the Eagles in how they're approaching offense heading into 2024, which I mean, I know a lot of Eagles fans who basically swore off football after the end of the 2023 season and how poorly that went for them. So I don't fault them for changing, but it's really going to be fascinating to see how this plays out, in reality when we get to September.
Somebody who spent some formative time in Philly as a 17-year-old from a small rural town in Ireland. I love the passion of the Philly fans, and perhaps Jalen Hurts' shaving of the goatee also was an indicator that it was going to be a sea change. Now, you mentioned at the start of that answer the guards, and we have seen interior guys. I mean, my goodness, like enormous contracts. Did that surprise you as much as it surprised me, Bill? The numbers that we're kind of seeing?
Yes, I expected some guards to get paid, certainly, and I wasn't surprised that their money got closer to tackle money, but I am surprised that it is this significant. And then, so we also have to remember, and this is the important thing to keep in mind, as we sit here, we're talking about day one of free agency. It is the agent's dream day. It is just texting insiders constantly with the best possible offer or best possible contract that their player could possibly get from the scenario. We have to take these numbers with a grain of salt. And I think there is going to be some deflation that we get on some of these deals where we actually get the full contract values down, which is a weird thing about football that is frustrating, but just the reality we have come to accept and live in. But even by those standards, even if you're deflating some of these contracts, I mean, Robert Hunt, a good player, not exactly a household name, got $100 million, even with incentives. That's, I think, a number nobody expected for him heading into this offseason. So when you look at what's changed in the NFL, and a lot of people do great work on this kind of topic, Over the Cap does really good work on this. I've written some stuff about this when it came to the draft over the past couple of years. And, we always hear about running backs not getting paid. And one of the things I looked at last year was, okay, well, if they're not getting paid, who's getting paid more? Where is that money going to? And one of the places it was going to was the offensive line that wasn't left tackles. Left tackles are getting paid already a ton and continue to get paid a ton, but we saw teams really flesh out more of the line. They're spending more on right tackle. They're spending more on guards, more on centers than ever before. And I think as we've seen NFL defensive lines get more aggressive in terms of moving people around, like Micah Parsons, even though he's on paper a linebacker according to the Cowboys and a great edge rusher. When it comes to maybe what his day-to-day role is, so much of what he does is rush the B gap, attack the guard, attack this weak point in the offensive line where you don't have your best pass protector, where you don't have the guys you're counting on to hold up all day against the best pass rushers in football. And so there's not really a safe haven anymore. You can't really hide a mediocre pass rusher. And so when we see teams, when teams see guards who are impact players, guards who can hold up against the pass and also contribute against the run, that's going to become a more valuable proposition. We've already seen teams devote more of the money that went to running backs towards guards. And I think that's sort of continuing here. Even the running backs are getting paid. They're not getting paid as much as they would have got paid 5 or 10 years ago when you think about the inflation of the cap. And guard pay is accelerating at a higher rate than the salary cap. And I think this is maybe an extreme example. Maybe there was just, that was the position where there were going to be solid starters available and teams were just willing to go out and pay a premium because there weren't going to be great tackles available. There weren't going to be great wide receivers available. But man, I mean, if you're a guard, today is a good day. Either you got paid, or if your contract's coming up in the next couple of years, your market just increased dramatically when it comes down to 2 or 3 years from now. So good day to be a big guy on the interior of an NFL offensive line.
I suppose good day for, as you said, for guards and in the future. Maybe where there's question marks at this point in time, and this could all change very quickly, but Justin Fields at this point, where does he go? And I suppose tag to that a little bit, Bill, I'm interested in your thoughts on the Minnesota Vikings with Kirk Cousins moving on. I mean, they have Justin Jefferson. They have a pretty decent roster, you would have to say. They're a very good coach in Kevin O'Connell. Mm-hmm. Is this, are they now the kind of the prime team to move up in the draft potentially? Those two, in terms of Fields and Minnesota, what are your thoughts on where it might play out for in both of those instances?
Very, very surprising that the Irish NFL show would prop up a good Irish name like O'Connell, Kevin O'Connell for the Vikings. He is a good coach, of course. I'm just teasing. But yeah, you're absolutely correct. I mean, this is a very interesting situation. I went on NFL Live, or ESPN show last week, and we talked about Justin Fields and what the best fit might be on paper. And I said the Minnesota Vikings because they're in a unique situation in terms of their cap. They have 3 great receivers to work with in Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and TJ Hawkinson, the latter of whom is hurt and going to miss the start of the year, but still a great trio of receivers. They have a good offensive line. They're very good at tackle. They have an offensive coordinator I think is very good or play caller, I should say, is very good in Kevin O'Connell as their head coach. The defense improved dramatically last year. They can be a playoff team with solid quarterback play. And same thing we said about the Atlanta Falcons, who went out and signed Kirk Cousins, which I'm sure we'll talk about as well. But from Fields' perspective, there's not many landing spots left. I mean, you go through some of the places he might have gone in free agency, and a lot of those spaces have filled up. Kirk Cousins went to the Atlanta Falcons. Russell Wilson signed with the Pittsburgh Steelers. We saw that Gardner Minshew signed with the Las Vegas Raiders, which I thought might have been maybe the dark horse spot, even though Luke Getsy, the former Bears offensive coordinator, ended up in Vegas. There's not a ton of options available for teams who do not also have direct path to getting a rookie quarterback in the top of this year's draft. And so you sort of take those first 3 teams off the list. You take Washington, New England, and Chicago off the list. You're really only left with a couple of teams. You're left with Denver, maybe, which they're in the market reportedly for JJ McCarthy. They could be a team trading up from 12. You're left with maybe oh gosh, the Giants, who have an uncertain future after Daniel Jones, who is coming off of a torn ACL and has multiple neck injuries in his past. And the Vikings just loom more and more as this logical fit, where if they were in the AFC North, we'd be making the connection easily. There'd be no questions. But because they're in the NFC North, this gets complicated. And Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, the Vikings GM, has been very comfortable trading within his division. He made a trade with the Packers, I think, on the Christian Watson deal. Made a trade with the Lions, I should say, that ended up with the Jameson Williams pact. I think they made a trade with the Bears as well, although it's not coming to me off the top of my head. But he's been very comfortable trading within the division, something that some NFL GMs just will not do under any circumstances. I don't know if Ryan Poles is desperate to trade Justin Fields in the division. I think you'd rather get him as far away from Chicago as possible, just in case Caleb Williams or whoever they take with the first overall pick is disappointing and Justin Fields turns out to be a star. But if the Vikings are the only landing spot left for a starting quarterback, I don't really know how you don't make that deal from both sides. So, the story that I think is being told as this day's gone along is, even though those two teams might not seem like the most logical trade candidates, it's really hard to have a universe where those two teams don't have this hook up and have it make sense, because Justin Fields right now is the best fit for the Minnesota Vikings, and the Minnesota Vikings are the best fit for Justin Fields.
I wanted to take you back. You wrote a really interesting piece in December about the most disappointing teams in the NFL at that time and kind of fixing those teams. And that was the Jets, the Chargers, and the Patriots. None of them listened to you, Vil, because the Patriots moved on from Belichick. The Chargers went with Harbaugh rather than McDonald, and the Jets have retained the services of Nathaniel Hackett. Do you still think those are as we sit here today, kind of three months on from that? And look, this is all like, so much can change so quickly. I get that, but would those still be your kind of three most disappointing, or have maybe the Broncos jumped in there ahead of the Chargers, or where do things sit, I suppose, in your thinking right now?
Yeah, I would put the Chargers in a better place now. I do think they were disappointing in terms of the talent they had amassed, but I do think the decision to hire Jim Harbaugh is a good one. I think Mike Macdonald's a great coach. I think he's going to do great, excellent work in Seattle, but I do think Jim Harbaugh was is a legitimately great NFL coach, someone who I regarded as maybe the best coach in football when he was in the league during his first tenure, certainly in the top 3 or 4. And getting him for, no draft compensation attached, just some money, is a fantastic move for the Chargers. I think that they have work to do. I think we're going to see them have to make some tough decisions in the next few days. There could be a move involving Keenan Allen or Mike Williams or Joey Bosa or Khalil Mack. Do they have to create some cap space? But I think they're going to be fine with Jim Harbaugh. I might throw the Broncos in there. They did fall apart, I would say, after that column. They had gone on a hot stretch and ended up struggling and missing out on a chance to compete for a playoff spot. They bench Russell Wilson to avoid his injury guarantee and then cut him. I mean, I guess it depends on if you view it as a multi-year problem. The Broncos are very disappointing. I thought that was going to be a good trade for them. It did not pan out in the worst way for the Denver Broncos. I think I'd throw the Giants in there as well. I was someone who was very skeptical of the Giants heading into 2023. I know others were more optimistic about the Giants, and they fell apart. They were worse than their record in terms of their underlying performance. And as you look at them heading into 2024, there's real concerns here, because that team, again, the numbers were a lot worse than even their record. They led the league, I believe, in takeaways, which they're not going to do again. They're making changes as defensive coordinator, and now you're losing 2 of your best players in terms of Saquon Barkley at running back, and you're losing now Xavier McKinney at safety, who signed a big deal to join the Packers. The regime there did not inherit a great cap situation. They did not inherit a great roster in terms of the quarterback situation. But that was an organization that looked at what happened last year with Daniel Jones. They fell in love with 1 year performance. That was a pretty clear outlier, given how he'd played in years past. There were real holes in his performance. And they're stuck now. They're stuck with another year of Daniel Jones making more than $40 million guaranteed. And I think that's a cautionary tale. I look at Baker Mayfield, who signed in Tampa for really a 1 year, $40 million deal, and then we'll see what happens after that. And 1 year is better than two in terms of guarantees for these quarterbacks, but I just think teams are very reactionary. I would say they really get attached to what have you done for me lately? Because a year ago, Baker Mayfield was the worst quarterback in football, cut by the Panthers, ended up signing a 1 year, $4 million deal with the Bucks. The year before that, Daniel Jones has had his fifth year option declined. He was a mess, couldn't stay healthy. And I would just be concerned about falling in love with that one great season, because I think history tells us if you're paying for that 1 year, expecting it to happen again, it typically does not happen. So I would put the Giants in that list. Again, I think it's relative from your perspective or what you thought heading into the year, but I thought the Chargers were going to be a playoff team, certainly, and they were not. So that's why I had them on the list at the time.
Just on the Broncos, Bill, like I mean, they continue to set records for the team to win the Super Bowl and then continuously miss the playoffs, and not just miss the playoffs. This team has losing season after losing season, which didn't happen under Pat Bowlen. Then they never had back-to-back losing seasons. Sean Payton comes in there. They give up a decent compensation, but Sean Payton is 60 years of age.
Sure.
The history of Super Bowl winning coaches going to a new organization is not littered with glittering success. Mike Shanahan might be one example of that. But like, if you've got, say, Greg Penner, who's come in, and you've got the Walmart money, and Greg Penner hasn't been shy about saying, he wants to see success. Sean Payton obviously wants to see success, but this is a team with holes all over the roster, and not exactly, if they were to go up in the draft, I mean, you'd be talking about this is a team that hasn't had a first round pick for a number of years. That will really begin to bite now. What is their path out of this? Because they're in a division with Patrick Mahomes, with Harbaugh, and with a Raiders team who appear to, while they may not have a lot of plan, they just throw stuff at the wall and kind of see what will stick.
Yeah, and sometimes that works. Sometimes that gets you into the postseason. And they went out. I don't think they're as close as they believe to be, but they went out and signed Christian Wilkins, who's a great player, to a massive deal today. So they're going to try and compete this year. So they're going to be a competitive team, and they're going to be a team that should be on paper better than the Denver Broncos, who don't really have a quarterback right now or have holes on their roster. I think there's two factors here, right? I mean, I believe that Sean Payton took this job a year ago thinking we have to try and win around Russell Wilson because he's going to be here for at least a year, probably a couple of years. And you saw what they did. They went out and they spent money. They signed Ben Powers. They signed Mike McGlinchey to massive deals relative to their markets at guard and tackle. They brought in guys on the defensive side of the ball, Zach Allen being maybe the most prominent, but they spent. And they weren't in great cap shape then with Russ, and they decided, instead of maybe taking a step back, to take a step forward and kind of put pedal to the metal, and that didn't really get them anywhere. Those guys did not make a difference. Russ, what I think was okay, but they did not want to commit to $38 million more for Russell Wilson in 2025, and so they had to cut him now to avoid that happening. If it were me, I would say they need to be realistic and take a step backwards. Like you said, they haven't had a first round pick in a while. They're feeling the impact of missing those first rounders from the Wilson trade, from the Sean Payton trade that cost them a first round. They did get one back for Bradley Chubb, but when you look at rosters, you don't really see this in terms of, you can't really see, they would have taken this guy or that guy. But those missing picks add up, and it hurts you in terms of your flexibility. It causes you to spend more in free agency to try to find replacements for those guys you don't have. And that, in history tells us, 2, 3, 4 years after you make a trade where you give up significant draft capital and don't get something significant in return for it, you really feel the pain of it. And that's my concern for the Broncos, is they don't feel like they're about to go ahead and really rebuild. It feels like they're sort of stuck in that middle ground right now between rebuilding and being realistic about contending. And that's a tough place to live. I mean, you have to get out of it either by having an incredible draft, which they could always do. Happened for the Saints. It turned around their franchise after they had been struggling in the middle of the 2010s. But it sort of feels like they're they messed up. I think they know they messed up, but the realistic path for them is the best path for them is probably just really take a step backwards, tear things down, trade the pieces you can, accept that you're going to be bad for a couple of years and start over. And they're sort of hoping to rebuild or retool on the fly while making a change at quarterback. So we'll see. If they draft JJ McCarthy and JJ McCarthy's great, hey, if you get a rookie quarterback, that solves a lot of your problems. But it does feel like they are in a position that I would not envy, because it's going to take a while for them to have a roster that's really competitive with the Chiefs.
And I suppose just would you then, if you were Sean Payton, George Payton, whoever is ultimately making the decision, would you be willing to, if you got a haul for Patrick Surtain, who obviously is very talented and seems to be a great character off the field, but given where the Broncos are at, given the limited ammo that they have, is that a move that really objectively they should consider, or is he a blue chip piece who you build around Bill?
I think they have to consider it at the very least. That you don't want to trade a guy like that. That's a building block at a position that's not quarterback, obviously, but in that second tier, maybe the third tier of positions, an elite player. Everyone regards as an elite player, young, still on his rookie deal. I mean, it makes you sick, the idea of trading a player like that, because that's something. It's such like a relief if you're a coach or a GM, like that feeling of, okay, I have to worry about all these things, but at least we got Pat. Like at least we know there's one guy who we don't have to worry about. But I mean, if the Rams come to you and offer you 2 first-round picks or 3 first-round picks or something crazy, or I think you have to give that serious thought, because we've seen what they can do with Patrick Surtain the past couple years. He's been great the past couple seasons, and they gave up 70 points to the Dolphins with Pat Surtain. They were missing Justin Simmons in that game, and it wasn't his fault, obviously. But if you can be that inconsistent on defense with that, even with a superstar player, I don't think you can have any sort of untouchables. I don't think you can say anybody is off the market or off or not available. And it's tough because you might trade Patrick when the Jags traded Jalen Ramsey. They didn't get anything. Like the picks they used ended up being disappointments. I think Caleb Chaseline was one of them, or maybe it was CJ Henderson. The couple of their first rounders they got for Ramsey were disappointing players. They ended up getting very little for what was a franchise core player, and that can happen when you make a trade like that for first round picks. But I like the Broncos are not a cornerback away. They're multiple pieces away at critical positions, and I think they have to be realistic about where they are.
You back in January, you had a good friend of this show on, JP Acosta, and you were talking about the Jags. The Jags have been one of the teams who have been more active. Though, as we've been speaking, actually, Will Lutz apparently is going to stay with the Broncos rather than go to the Jags.
Wow.
But they have been active in plenty of other ways. After the disappointment of last year, do you think that the moves that the Jags have kind of made, because it's an interesting one, because when JP was on with you and he's talked to me about, like, the center was a key piece that he really felt they need. They seem to kind of address that, but in the receiving side of things, I mean, they gave a pretty sizable contract to Gabe Davis when you're going into what feels like, from the outside and from 5,000 miles away, a pretty stacked, wide receiver draft. So I'm interested in your thoughts on the moves they've made thus far.
Yeah, it's sort of been one step forward, one step backwards. I thought getting Mitch Morse made sense. There is the injury concerns. He has a track record of concussions, unfortunately, but he's been a very good player and a really stable player when on the field. And I think that's what the Jaguars needed last year. I mean, the offensive line was in flux for so much of the season, whether it was Cam Robinson's suspension or the injury, moving guys around. They brought players in as the year went along. They brought in Ezra Cleveland, who then they re-signed to kind of a questionable deal, although guard contract looks bad after what we saw guards get in free agency. So I understand investing there along the offensive line. And Doug Peterson, coming from Philadelphia, makes sense, right? Invest in the offensive line, protect your quarterback, no issues there. Trading for Mac Jones, I can see it. I can understand the logic of we need to upgrade at backup quarterback. Our season fell apart once Trevor Lawrence got hurt, and we didn't have a guy who we felt confident about behind him. CJ Beathard got hurt almost immediately behind him and kind of played while he was banged up. And so if we can turn around Mac Jones, maybe that will give us more of a security blanket or safety blanket. Security blanket, safety blanket. That's not a real thing. Give us more security if Trevor Lawrence does get hurt again, and that does make sense. But Mac Jones is signed for 1 year and $2.7 million. So are you going to extend Mac Jones? You're not going to pick up his 5th-year option. Are you going to sign him to a deal to be a backup? Does he want to do that? Or those are all questions I think are fair to ask about what happens with Mac Jones, because Mac Jones to me was not a plug and play solution. He looked so broken and so emotionally and mentally exhausted from his time in New England that it felt like he needed to rest and he needed time to get his confidence back, get his timing back, get his ability to read defenses back, because that was something that felt like it went away in New England over the past couple of seasons. And that might not be a process where he's ready to play week 1. So then that's, you're signing a player for a 1-year deal, basically, where you don't know what he's going to be. The Gabe Davis one you brought up is the one that I really find curious. And you mentioned why. This is a great draft class for wide receivers. And my friend and my colleague, Mina Kimes, has brought this up a lot in our conversations about the NFL this year. When you have so many good wide receivers coming into the league each year through the draft, and this, by all accounts, based on the mocks, based on the scouts, based on what we talked to in the league, everyone says this is a really exciting wide receiver class. If you're going to go out and sign a Calvin Ridley, okay, Calvin Ridley's, he's consistent, or he's not consistent, it's the wrong word. We've seen what he can be. We know he can be a number 1 receiver in the right role. We've seen him be a guy who can be a game changer. I don't think that he was the problem with the Jaguars offense last year. But Gabe Davis has struggled to find targets in Buffalo, which is one of the most pass-happy offenses in football. We know he can stretch the field. We know he's a competent blocker. We know that he is a good teammate, but is he a player who is going to command a significant target share? Is he a player who is going to be reliable in terms of catching the football? And are you paying a premium for Gabe Davis when you might be able to get someone who's better than Gabe Davis in the 2nd round of the draft, the 3rd round of the draft, and pay them a lot less than what Gabe Davis is going to make, which at least I think it's around $11 million per year on the initial numbers. So that to me is a little surprising. Gabe Davis is really young. Maybe the Jaguars think he can get better during his time in Jacksonville, but even if you were going to sign a downfield threat, Marquise Brown's been a better player in the league, and he's had injury issues. He's probably going to be more expensive, but Marquise Brown has been a much better player than Gabe Davis, or even on a lower level, Marquez Valdez-Scantling is not a great player, has drop issues, but a player who has the speed to threaten people downfield, has been, has come up with games like Gabe Davis where he's been valuable for the team and is going to be cheaper than Gabe Davis because he's an older player. That middle ground didn't seem to make sense to me. And we'll see. Maybe it'll be a much smaller deal. Maybe it'll be 1 year and $8 million, and it won't seem quite as bad. But the Gabe Davis deal did seem very curious. I'm interested to see what that means for the fit in Jacksonville at receiver.
It's funny, like you talked earlier, I suppose, about the Giants kind of falling in love with the last year of Daniel Jones. It feels like Gabe Davis is kind of benefiting from that Bills-Chiefs playoff game. And we all saw it, and it was incredible. It was one of the most, I've been watching football 30 years. It was an absolute humdinger of a game. And it feels like people kind of saw that and went, oh, that's what he is. And yes, kind of been chasing the dragon a little bit on that. Bill, I'm conscious of your time, and you have been generous, but I'm going to, a final question question because you had a guest on recently, Stefania Bell, and you said
Okay.
you got a final question was an impossible question you said to her.
Oh no.
And so I'm going to turn this on you because you asked her about the future, but in relation to the field. But I'm just
Mhm.
going to, in a broad sense, right? We sit here March 2024.
Okay.
What are the trends? What does the league look like 10 years from now,
Ooh.
in 2034? Um, how, at that point, what is, because if we go back, if we go to say 2014,
Right.
and we look at where it was then, you mean the Russ is obviously you're talking 10 years on from Russ, but the league certainly looks different 10 years on.
Mm.
Is there anything that you look at that, I mean, teams are obviously, the kickoff is something that kind of comes up all the time. The Eagles have
Mhm.
tried to look at different ways about onside kick and kind of
Mhm.
the fourth and 15. Is special teams potentially the area that might change the most within the next decade? This is idle speculation, the end of a podcast, but I'm just wondering, is there anything that jumps out to you as something that you think, do you know what, I could see the league having an issue with this, or I could see the league wanting additional point, like wanting it to make it more exciting? Or what is it that you think that the league, because the numbers are only going one way and the game is only growing internationally as well?
Of course. And it's really fascinating. I think there's a lot of different ways to take that question, which means it's a good question. So thank you. Um, in terms of the league's rules, you brought up the kickoff, you brought up special teams, and I think that's where the most likely changes are to happen. Certainly, the kickoff is something where the league wants to reduce injuries, which is great. We've seen the XFL kickoff work for as a way to reduce injuries while still retaining some semblance of a kickoff. The NFL might just eliminate the kickoff altogether over the next 10 years. I don't think. I do like the idea of having some semblance of a kickoff. I think it's good to have, the element of special teams in football, but I do think that player safety should take a priority here. And so I think finding a solution that does not involve as much force makes sense for all parties involved, and I think will happen over the next 10 years. In terms of rules, it's interesting. There's some things teams take for granted or sort of maybe push a little bit that I could see defenses or offenses try to complain about if it ends up impacting a game. Something that comes to mind for me, for example, is the RPO game and that sort of murky ground, right? Where if you're an offensive lineman, you can get 1 yard downfield blocking on a passing play, but theoretically, 1.5 yards, 2 yards downfield, if you were blocking downfield, that should be a penalty. And I will tell you, in the RPO game where you're looking to try to read a player, the offensive line is blocking for a run, you might hold the ball and throw the ball. Illegal man downfield, that penalty is called. It happens, but it's so inconsistent and so rare that I don't think teams take it as a serious hindrance. It's not like if a crew calls illegal man downfield that teams are going to say, okay, we're scrapping our RPOs for the rest of the game or the rest of the year. Like they caught us this time, but we're going to do it again. And there'll be plays where like, oh God, like an offensive lineman will be 12 yards downfield and nobody will notice because he's not really blocking anybody. I could see that being something where the league says, hey, we're going to crack down on this. We have the tracking data. We can automate it with our game tracking data with next gen stats. We have chips in your shoulder pads. If you're more than a yard downfield on an RPO, you're getting penalized, and that could dramatically impact the game in terms of calling those RPOs, in terms of calling stuff, and might make running backs more valuable because you have to get back to more of a traditional designed run game than a more of the RPO game. So I could see something like that. I could see pass interference rules change again. I've advocated for something a little like the old system, where the old system had 15 yard and like a more flagrant pass interference that was spot foul. the league moved it all to the spot foul system. I could see I've argued for like a 15, or sorry, that was for face mask, excuse me. Or face mask was 5 and 15. I've argued for pass interference kind of like that, where it's, you have a 15-yard penalty, a 5-yard penalty for, like, kind of incidental pass interference, 15-yarder for something more flagrant like the NCAA's rules, and then a spot foul, sort of like the last man foul in soccer, where it's you denied a goal scoring opportunity. It's a clear penalty where you were just trying to drag somebody down. That should be a spot foul, as opposed to having most fouls be a 15-yard pass interference penalty. I could see something like that. I could see the league moving. I think you're going to see defenses get more creative. I believe that for so long, in terms of what we see schematically on the field, offenses were dictating the game. And I think really in the past few years, we've seen defenses get more creative, try to be more like during the Seattle Seahawks era, during the Legion of Boom era, they didn't care. Like, they were going to line up and cover 3 and just beat you with their athletes. We're seeing defenses be a lot more creative in terms of, post snap pressure, in terms of disguises before the snap, and showing one thing before the snap and changing to something different, sort of that Fangio style of constantly confusing the quarterback. I think you're going to see that continue to be the case, and continue to grow on the defensive side of the ball. We're going to have more, I think, more people regarded as creative geniuses on the defensive side of the ball than we have on the offensive side of the ball. Or it's supposed to be an offense in the years past. I think it'll be more of a defense-offense split in the years to come. And I think we're going to see Patrick Mahomes win like 5 Super Bowls. I think we're going to be sitting here a decade from now saying, man, that Mahomes has been around forever, and he keeps winning the damn game. And for everything we think about the Chiefs, they have no receivers. They make mistakes. Mahomes gets them out of the way. And I think that's sort of the simplest thing, is that at the end of the day, if you have a special duty quarterback, you can make a lot of bad decisions or get a lot of things wrong, or even just, not have things go your way, and it's not going to matter. And that's the oldest thing in the book, and it's going to be the case for decades to come as well.
Yeah, no, I think an awful lot of sense in everything you've said there, because we've seen Mahomes win in different ways. And I think in terms of the defense, what I saw a piece the other day, a stat going back to the merger, and it was average yards per completion. And like, it was back in the 80s, it was over 12.5, and then it dropped, and it's kind of ebbed and flowed a little bit, but since like 2020 it has dropped, and we're under 11 over the last few years, which is the lowest it's been. And I think is a testament to what you're saying about the creativity of defenses and disguised looks, and what they're looking to do. They are looking to dictate to offenses rather than always be on the defense footing. Bill, this has been a really fun 3/4 of an hour. Thank you for joining me again. If there are people out there, and I can't imagine there are too many people who are listening to the Irish NFL show but are unaware of Bill Barnwell, but if they want to check out your stuff, which they absolutely should, where can they do that?
Oh gosh, ESPN.com. That is where you'll find all my work. You'll find it in the NFL section. You can find it on Twitter at Bill Barnwell. I'll link all the stuff I put out there. You'll find me on various shows. Bill Barnwell Show podcast is available where you download your podcasts. I am a guest on all kinds of other podcasts as well. And then various ESPN television programming, depending on what filters through, NFL Live, Sports Center, all that good stuff. So just point your eyes at ESPN, and I'll show up sometimes.
Well, yeah, and it's always wonderful when you do make a guest appearance, say with Robert Mays on the Athletic, when you do the kind of annual or twice a year at this point. But I appreciate your time, and hopefully we have a few more deals to look forward to over the coming days.
Of course, we still have a lot of players left in the market, so I am excited to see what happens. So thanks so much for having me, and we'll have more to discuss in the days to come, I'm sure.